there will be 52 states in the United States before there are 51. Wait, what? It's a mathematical impossibility to go from 50 to 52 without going through 51. Well, let me take you back to another 51. That is 1951, the Civil Rights era. The second most powerful man in the United States, the Democratic Senate Majority Leader Lyndon Johnson, had a problem. He was not the most powerful man in the United States, the president, but he had a path. You see, the majority of people in the United States, Democrat and Republican, wanted action on civil rights. And as the Senate Majority Leader, he was in the unique position to pass a civil rights bill. Okay, so what's the problem? You're the leader of a body that the majority of senators in that body want to pass a bill. And you don't pass it? Was Lyndon Johnson a bigot? Well, to be a bigot, you need to have principles. Racist principles, like the anti-melanization of the race, which is the kind of old-timey, when racism was kind of like mixed with science, that kind of era, that kind of way of saying no black and white families, right? So that would be a racist principle. Lyndon Johnson was never burdened by principles. He found them way too encumbering. The best way to describe him would be oil. Very slippery, but always conforming to the container which it's placed in. You see, if you were a liberal and you spoke to Lyndon Johnson privately, you would find out that for all his life, he had been a liberal. But if you were conservative and you spoke with him also, again, privately, you would find out that a liberal idea had never crossed this traditional man's brain. Okay, so he wasn't a racist. So why didn't he get anything passed? Well, we've considered the step 2 of the path to becoming the president, right? You pass a civil rights bill, then you beat the Republican nominee and become president. But in our oversimplification of how to become president in the 2-step process that is, step 1 is a little bit of a problem. For Lyndon Johnson to become the Democratic nominee, which is step 1, he would have to have the support of the South, and therefore the senators of the South, who did have some of those principles we were talking about. The South was able to stop the Civil Rights Bill from passing with one easy trick: talk. The American Senate comes from the British Parliament with all their rules of propriety and formality. And one such rule of decorum is that when a senator is speaking, you don't interrupt them. Ideally, we would want only one senator speaking, not 100 at a time. So this makes sense. But it begs 2 questions. How long do we let a senator talk? Until he or she finishes their point. What if their point is not related to the debate at hand? Well, who are you to tell a senator elected by the people what is and what is not relevant to a debate at hand? And it's with those 2 answers that we come up with the weapon the South used to stop a civil rights bill from passing: the filibuster. Whenever there's a debate, just don't stop talking. You can never vote on something if you're debating it. And that you can never finish debating it if someone is still talking. Okay, but how many debates are there in the Senate? Well, a bill starts out in a committee, and before a bill goes to the Senate floor, it must be debated to see if it's good enough. Then every single day in the Senate, bills need to be voted on to decide whether or not they get put on the agenda for that day. So there needs to be a debate to figure out which bills are relevant. Then when you want to take a bill off of the agenda to put onto the floor, you need to debate. And then finally, when a bill is on the floor, there needs to be a debate to see if the bill should pass or not. So if you're counting, that's 4 separate debates and 4 separate possibilities for a filibuster when you really only need 1. The real sharpness of this tool comes out when you think that there are some bills that are more important than others. Some bills need to be passed in a timely manner, say the governmental budget. So if a senator is filibustering on a civil rights bill when you need the spending bill to be passed, if it's not passed, then you will literally lose your job as a senator. You would be more inclined to let this civil rights bill never come to a vote. And that's the power of the filibuster. Just a little aside and 2 little anecdotes that I think are kind of funny in terms of the filibuster. The longest filibuster was 24 hours. And you must be like, what fueled this man to go 24 hours, right? This is no drinking water, no going to the bathroom, just straight talking. What fueled him to do that? Racism. Second anecdote comes from the 51st or the 52nd state, potentially. That is Canada. You see, in their Senate, the debates are transcribed. But since they speak 2 different languages, English and French, it needs to be transcribed in both languages, regardless of what was actually spoken. So one senator wrote a book in English, and to get a free translation into French, he just read his whole book, and then he got a free translation in French. The only weakness of the filibuster is cloture. Basically, if 2/3 of the Senate think a debate is over, then it's over. Doesn't matter who's talking. So that means to maintain the filibuster, you need 1/3 of the Senate, which the South had in 1951, but just barely. Then a bill came to their attention, which was to admit Hawaii as the 49th state. You see, when a state joins the Union, they get congressmen proportional to their population size. But with senators, it's a bit different. Every single state, no matter the population, whether it's 2 million or 2, get 2 senators. So admitting Hawaii, which had a majority non-white population, would probably elect 2 Republican senators who would be for cloture and against the Southern Democratic filibuster. Therefore, this was a no-go. The compromise was to admit Alaska, which was thought to give 2 Democratic senators, then admit Hawaii, which was going to give 2 Republican senators to maintain the balance. We find ourselves in a very similar situation right now. Prior to the 2024 election, the Senate was tied 50-50, 50 Republicans to 50 Democrats. If we admitted only one state, a 51st state, that means the balance would be broken, and one side, probably the Democrats, would have 52 senators to the 50 senators. So we would need to admit a 52nd state, which would be Republican, to maintain the balance and have it 52 to 52 instead of 52 to 50. Okay, let's go through some possible candidates for the 51st and 52nd state. There's Canada. Even though annexing a country that's friendly seems like a great idea, I don't think that's going to actually happen. There's Washington, D.C. What's peculiar about Washington, D.C. is that it's the only part of the United States where people living there do not elect their congressmen, with a little asterisk, or any senators. Yet they are still taxed, which to me sounds a bit like taxation without representation. 1776 all over again. There's Puerto Rico. They have voted 6 times to try to become a state, but Congress keeps leaving them on red. Okay, so why don't we admit both Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C.? Well, the problem is Washington, D.C. is a major city, which means they vote Democrat. And Puerto Rico was recently called an island of garbage at a Trump rally. So they're also Democrat. So we can't admit them. We need a 52nd Republican state. My solution is simple. We split West Virginia into Northwest Virginia and Southwest Virginia. And then we add them as the 52nd state with Washington, D.C.